In today's session, we're going to try and answer the question of how do I draw and measure lines accurately. So we're going to develop our ability to draw and measure in centimeters and millimeters, and we're going to apply this to some questions about two-dimensional shapes. So before we start, the first thing you're going to have to do is find yourself a ruler. So pause the video, get yourself a ruler, come and join me when you're ready. So now you're ready, let's have a look at our first questions in the textbook. And this all relates to the work that Kate and Richard are doing, dividing pieces of paper into certain squares. We can see that Kate's saying to make a 10 centimeter square, I need to measure 10 centimeters across the top of the paper with my ruler. And Richard's saying, I have done the measuring, so now I can cut out my 10 centimeter squares. So let's see what our questions are going to be asking for today. So for question 1a, we're being asked, how many 10 centimeter squares can you make out of a strip of paper like Kate's? And we're told that this piece of paper is 29 centimeters and 7 millimeters wide. So how can we do this accurately? So imagining that you've got that piece of paper in front of you the same length, the first question we've got to think about with this is, where should you place the ruler to start the measurement? How do we actually place it? This is one of the key things we've got to think about. Then, how do we measure exactly 10 centimeters? And then finally, we can ask that question of how many whole 10 centimeter squares can actually be made. And then we've got our question 1a answered. So let's have a look at question 1b. And here we're asked, how wide is the piece of paper that is left over? So this is going to be using those number sentences that we know. So it could be one of our 4 operations to work out how much paper is left after we've made those 10 centimeter squares. So almost like a 2-part problem. So with this, the big thing is think carefully about how to measure. Take your time, make sure you're correct. Don't rush this part because you think it's easy, because this will probably be the part where you'll make a mistake. So take your time with that idea. And let's look at these questions and then we're ready to give it a go. So question 1a, how many 10 centimeter squares can you make out of a strip of paper like Kate's? It's 29 centimeters and 7 millimeters wide. How can you do this accurately? And for question 1b, how wide is the piece of paper that is left over? So now it's time to pause the video, head off, answer this question, and come back and join me when you're ready to look at the strategy. So let's take a look at question 1a. How many 10 centimeter squares can we make out of a strip of paper like Kate's? And we know that this strip of paper is 29 centimeters and 7 millimeters long. So we can see that the first step is to measure 10 centimeters along the top and along the bottom and mark it exactly. So I've zoomed in a little bit because what I'm going to use my ruler. I need this strip of paper to be exactly the same size as the ruler that I'm using, which is here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure 10 centimeters along the top and bottom exactly. So I'll take my ruler. If I place it just like this, we can see that if I was measuring it from here to 10 centimeters, my line would go along there. However, if you look very carefully, what you'll notice at this end, I'm not starting on the 0, I'm starting before the 0 started. So what I need to do is actually move that 0 so it's right at the beginning. And can you notice now there's a bit of my ruler that goes in front of the paper. Why? Because that's no measurement. I start on the 0 every single time. That allows me to then put my red mark where the 10 is, and then I can measure my 10 centimeters at the bottom, and now I can take my line and I can place it between those 2 marks that I've created. So now I have created my first 10 centimeter square. And now that red line that you saw, well, I've used my ruler to line up both those marks, place the pencil on one of the marks to help me line it up, and then I've simply drawn the line down before using my scissors to carefully cut straight along that line. Which leaves me with another part, and I'm going to repeat the process all over again. So I've measured from the very end, starting at 0 at the top to 10, did my mark, went to the bottom from 0 to 10, made my mark, took my ruler, placed it across both those marks and drew my line vertically. Then I've cut it out. Now I'm going to see whether I can make another 10 centimeters. So I've used 10 centimeters and another, that's 20 out of my 29 centimeters and 7 millimeters. But now what I've discovered is I don't have 10 centimeters left. So I can only make two 10 centimeter squares. Now we can move on to question 1b, which is to work out how wide is the piece of paper that's left over. So we know that we've made two squares that are 10 centimeters and we have some paper left over. So in here we can see 10 centimeter square, 10 centimeter square and some paper. And if we're thinking about this as a number line, well, 10, 20, and I need to go to 29 centimeters and 7 millimeters, which means there's 9 centimeters and 7 millimeters left. We're simply doing a counting on from 20 to get to 29 centimeters and 7 millimeters, or a takeaway of 29 centimeters and 7 millimeters, take away 20. And that will leave us with a piece of paper left over that's 9 centimeters and 7 millimeters wide. So for question 1a, we were asking how many 10 centimeter squares we could make out of that strip of paper. Well, the answer is 2. And for question 1b, how wide is the piece of paper that's left? Well, it's 9 centimeters and 7 millimeters. So now we've finished that first question, let's have a little look at the next one in our textbook. So for these questions, you're going to need those 10 centimeter squares that you've hopefully created in our first part. And for question 1, you can see we're asked to draw these lines on one of the 10 centimeter squares that you've made. So think about carefully how we use those rulers, remembering that we start at the 0. And then when you're looking at this, think about which line will you measure and draw first. And then once you've considered those, give it a go. So good luck with this, and I look forward to seeing your work.